Well, you guys are really in for a treat. I know I say that often, but this is something that I'm actually really excited about, this particular episode. And if you've been following me on social media for, I don't know, the last 3 months or so, you've seen that kind of we've stepped into this new lifestyle of having a little bit more space and trying to have a little bit more control over our food and just our living. And my friend Jill is somebody who actually came into my life probably, gosh, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago? We
Yeah.
were both in a natural wellness company together. And so we'd been on a couple trips together. And I've just watched her grow this incredible farm ranch and also a brand. Jill is the founder of the Prairie Homestead, and they're currently running a beef ranch as well. Is that how I would say that? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. We just ranch. Yeah.
Okay.
Ranch. Yeah. It can be a verb or a noun. So
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
But I'm really excited to have you on because I think that one of the things that I didn't realize really until being put into this situation now is there's actually a lot you can do with small spaces. And I think that the idea of homestead has become a trend, of course, since 2020. And as I was telling Jill, actually, before we got started here, I've been binging all of her podcasts. We'll link to all of that in the show notes, and all the information that she shares just to learn and be educated. But one of the things that you've helped me understand, and I think you do really well with your education, is it can be really simple. You can do a little, or you can do a lot with a little. And even though homesteading is kind of a trend, it's not something that you have to have 40 acres to do. And so I want you to, before we kind of jump into this topic of doing a lot with a little and just taking more control back over your food and your family and your home, I would love you to just share with us, how did you get to this place where you're in the middle of Wyoming? And you said last night it was below 30 degrees, which is crazy.
Yes.
And you're running this incredible brand, this beautiful ranch and family. Tell us a little bit about your story and how this started.
Absolutely. I'd love to. And thank you so much for having me on. It's so fun to be here and connect with your audience. But I'd say my story starts out pretty conventionally. I'm guessing like a lot of people's who enter this lifestyle. I didn't intend to end up here. I was raised as a very typical standard American kid in a standard American neighborhood in the 90s. My parents, we had diet soda for every meal, and we ate macaroni and cheese out of a box and hot dogs, and like it was just normal. Everything was normal. I use that term with air quotes. And so it wasn't until I was a young adult. I've always had a thing for horses, and so that was my one piece of myself that was maybe a little unconventional, and that brought me on this adventure to Wyoming. Again, I wasn't intending to farm or homestead. I just wanted to ride horses for a living. And so long story short, when I met my husband, we knew that we didn't want to live in town because I needed a place for my horses. And so we started shopping for acreage, and this was 2008. So homesteading wasn't a thing. Nobody knew what it was. Like nobody had chickens. You couldn't get mason jars at the stores. Like it was really weird. Like it was just weird, straight up what we were doing. Everyone was like, why are you not getting a house in town next to Walmart? Like why? But we wanted land, and we were also very, on a very tight budget. So we ended up buying a tumble down farm that was 40 miles from town, just for the horses and just to have that ability to have a little more space for a little less money. But I know it was meant to be because almost the day we signed on that dotted line, I just was kind of hit with this inspiration of what if we could turn this property into something else, and how could we make it productive? And that was kind of the genesis of beginning to question the systems around me, because I hadn't questioned really anything up to that point. I was very much kind of a rule follower, and I just did what I was supposed to do. And I was always the one, if anyone knew me as a child, they'd say I was very obedient and very just kind of passive. And so taking that leap and buying that tumble down farm gave me permission, if you will, to start asking questions. And the questions started with, why do we have to be like everybody else? Why do I have to eat the food that they sell at the grocery store? Why do we have to raise our vegetables in this one manner? Why do I have to buy milk that's only pasteurized? And so this process of asking questions, if we fast forward to now, has turned into a whole lifestyle of its own. But it's brought me down some really incredible paths that, has opened up our horizons in every way you can imagine. So Just
Wow,
that's the nutshell version.
that is so cool. I forgot about the fact that you are really into horses as well. And I love that you kind of just changed the trajectory and the patterns of what you were raised in for your own kids because you moved out to that
Yes.
property before you had your own kids. And now this is all they know. They know what
Yeah.
it's like to grow their own food and to be a part of it. I imagine they're probably out there with you. Yes.
They are. Yes, they're very much a part. And I think that's been one of the most fun parts for Christian and I, because he was also raised almost identically to me, even though we were raised in different states and didn't know each other when we were kids. But you have the ability to change the legacy and the family tree of your children and their descendants. And so being able to make that pivot has been really, really rewarding.
And so rewarding for their health. Like that is
Yes.
huge. I mean, just, I don't know if you're familiar with Price Pottinger,
Mm-hmm.
and how Pottinger did that study on cats, right? And just how you can kind
Yes.
of change the generation of future generation. You can change future generations just by changing diet. And
Yes.
that's incredible. It's such a powerful thing to know for our kids, you know?
It
So I
is.
love that.
And yeah, and bringing them along. And I would say this absolutely applies to anyone listening who would want to do this on a scale like we are, which is kind of extreme, or just doing it in their backyard or doing it on their kitchen counters or doing, and we'll talk about some of those ideas in a minute. But the coolest thing with the kids is it's absolutely impacting their physical health in ways that they don't even realize yet. But just the way they think and the knowledge they have of the natural world and where food comes from and what makes healthy food. And I don't just have to like show them pictures of what healthy food looks like in a book. Like they know very intimately what it looks like coming out of the soil. They understand fermentation and bacteria. We were talking about our guts today in our science lesson and how microbes are good in the soil and they're good in us. And so just seeing them have that understanding of the world, which in our modern society, I think all of us have missed that. You know, we don't realize that exists. That's pretty cool.
We're raised in such a sterile environment. Like if you do
So
walk
sterile.
into that, just kind of blindly following lead and not questioning, like you said, not asking, wait, why is it this way? Why does it have to be this way? It's such a sterile environment. And it's
It
the
is.
opposite of how we were created.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I have definitely heard, speaking of microbes and the immune system, that farm kids, like kids that are knee deep in dirt and manure and
Yeah.
animals, have such a strong immune system because of the exposure, because it's the opposite of sterile, which I'm sure you've
Absolutely. Yeah.
experienced that with your kids. They probably don't get sick very often.
They don't. They're pretty darn healthy. I mean, we still get the occasional head cold. We're not,
Right.
totally iron immune system. But yeah, I totally. It's again, it's just that tweaked mindset compared to what our modern culture tells us. It's like all the Lysol, all the bleach, wiping down. I'm like, no. Like, I don't care. Like, you can eat a carrot from the ground unwashed. Doesn't make me even blink. Like, roll in the dirt. Manure is really not that big of a deal. Like, manure is
Right.
just hay and water. And so yeah, it's fun to see them in their natural habitat.
I love that. Well, will you tell us, because I do want to give the perspective of where you're at and what you have now. And then we'll talk about how to kind of work with what you have no matter where you're at. So right now you're on, how much land do you guys have?
So our personal homestead is 67 acres, but then we lease ground for our big beef herd, because out here in Wyoming, we have sparse grass. We need a lot of land to run an animal.
Okay. Okay. So about 67, you said, acres.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
how, for your homestead, outside of what you're selling, because I know that's a separate part of what you're doing, what animals do you have? How many? You have chickens. I know you do have your own cattle. Do you have a dairy cow? Like, what do you have right now?
Yeah, so we have a couple dairy cows, which is probably one of my favorite parts. I just love the whole milk process and the cheese and the butter. And so we milk those not year round because they have to have a baby, and then we raise the baby alongside them as we milk. So just like a human, you only are in milk when you are, nursing an infant. So that's I'd say 9 months out of the year we have raw milk, and then we have chickens for both eggs and meat. We butcher them ourselves. We raise pigs every couple years. They're not a primary meat for us, more of a supplement, just because it's hard to raise them here in a sustainable way, just with the way our pasture is and our feed situation. We have our commercial beef herd that we do sell, but then we have our own private beef animals that we raise for our own freezers. And then we have a greenhouse and a garden. So Wyoming is probably one of the most inhospitable states to garden in. So that's been a really steep learning curve, but we're able to grow quite a bit. when we combine the greenhouse with our summer months.
That is one thing that you've given me so much hope as I've, like I said, just kind of binging the podcasts and learning about gardening from you. So I'm like, if she can do it in freaking Wyoming, I've got to be able to figure this out in Northern California.
You will be good. You will be good.
I know, right? I'm like,
the mecca of gardening.
I have hope for like an avocado tree if you can grow things in Wyoming.
Totally. Yep.
Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing a little bit of just kind of a glimpse into what you have. But help me define this idea for our audience of homestead. I think, again, we have this picture in our head of a 60 or 100-acre ranch with everything you just said. But will you kind of break down that idea? What is homestead, and why is this something that no matter where you're at, you should consider as an important thing?
Yes, I love this question. And I also have been really playing around with redefining some terms lately. So I have used the word homestead forever. It's now the common vernacular that's floating around. But I think it really has that connotation that you have to have 60 acres and a milk cow. And I think it kind of trips people up sometimes. And so what I've been trying to do lately is just invite people to think of it more as a stripping away of the industrial mindset. Because when we look at really what has brought us to where we are as a culture, started about 150 years ago, give or take, like it's really this idea that it's this religion of industrialism. And it started with advents of factories and these great minds of industry who thought they could do things better than nature. And it's not all bad. There were some good things that happened as a result of that, but it's really permeated every single piece of our lives, and we don't even realize it. And so we're living in these artificial confines, like almost a human zoo, if you will, in every area of our lives. And so homesteading, I think, is just, or however you want to term it, is just a way to strip that away and go, what were we meant to do? How are we meant to live? How are we meant to eat? Where, in what situations do our bodies thrive? And you can answer those questions without a farm, without a milk cow, without living in Wyoming. And that's what makes me, I think, the most excited. I love helping people get milk cows, but even more, I love helping people understand that you have control, you are autonomous, and you can make these choices regardless of where you live.
That is such a good description. I love that. I think that, again, it's in teaching people to question, right? Just stepping away from the monotonous activity of going to the grocery store every single day and questioning, like, okay, wait a second, where is this coming from? Looking at things like ingredients and just becoming more aware of, like, I guess, the evolution of where we're at now from the Industrial Revolution and what's changed. And, so what you said was, if we're stripping away this industrial mindset, just simply taking your home, if somebody's living on a city lot, less than a quarter of an acre, a standard city lot, I think even considering what we talked about earlier with the kids, making it a goal to spend more time during the day outdoors than in your box, right? That's one simple step. It's just exposure to sunshine, exposure to fresh air. But what would you say if you were speaking to somebody that is willing to kind of step into this idea of questioning the mainstream and stripping away this idea that the Industrial Revolution kind of almost brainwashed us to not question? What would you say would be a good place outside of being outside, a good place for somebody to start?
So I always recommend that you start with food, because everybody has to eat. We're doing it 3 times a day. So it's really impacting our lives. And you can do it even if you live in the tiniest apartment in the middle of New York City. And so what that looks like, and that comes in stages. So the first thing I want people to remember is there's a lot of amazing resources. Thank you, internet. Like, we have this fire hose of information now in this era. So that's great. It can also be so overwhelming that you want to curl up in a ball and just not even look at it, right? So this will not happen overnight, and feel free to follow people for inspiration, but don't let that inspiration like kind of turn toxic and make you feel like you're not doing enough, because it's a baby step process. But I think the first piece to consider is just like, where is your food coming from? And just start asking those questions when you go to the grocery store. Another question that's really good is, we talk about, I know you talk about ingredients a lot. Ingredients are really important. And so start buying items. If you're not able to grow it or go to a farmer's market quite yet, or meet a farmer, start buying items with fewer unrecognizable ingredients. Just stick with more whole foods, whole fruits and vegetables, meats that are in their whole form and not ground up and packaged and processed with a bunch of other stuff in plastic. And so that's like kind of the first step, to strip that back, because a lot of the food that's in our stores that are just, it's like the normal American diet, it's made up of just a handful of ingredients. I heard someone call it, I wish I could remember who, they call it human kibble, because it's corn, wheat, and soy over and over and over and over again. And it's almost like one of those kind of dystopian movies where they're feeding people like bars of things. And it's just like,
Totally.
it's not food. It's not food, but we're told it's food. And we're so used to seeing everyone around us eat it. We never think to question it. I didn't. I ate that stuff forever. So getting back to the basics and going, who told me this was food, and who told me this was something I should eat? And what did humans eat before this era for thousands and thousands of years? And what are our bodies designed to thrive on? So start stripping that back. And then what you'll find is you start eating more whole ingredients versus prepackaged food, is that you have an opportunity to learn how to prepare those ingredients. And that's where that cooking comes in. And so I know a lot of people have that kind of negative attitude towards cooking. It's drudgery. It's annoying. I hate to cook. I hear that a lot. But I would invite you to kind of reframe that in, like, this is an opportunity for you to kind of reconnect with nature. It's an opportunity for you to use your hands, which science tells us that can help with anxiety and depression. And it kind of triggers things in our brains that feels good to us. We get those releases of dopamine and the happy chemicals when we're creating. And cooking can kind of end up being a form of meditation when we're choosing to do it in an intentional way. So I
love that.
Yeah,
that is so true. And I think what you just said, I hope that everybody understood that impact of cooking. Just starting, you don't need to start growing your own food. You don't need to get a dairy cow in your backyard. You don't even need chickens. If you can just start with preparing your meals, that is therapeutic. Like you said, it can help with anxiety. Yes. The other thing too is, I mean, I know as a practitioner, I deal with so many people with so many health issues. And one of the things people don't understand is part of we were created to go through food as an enjoyment. It's not just eat to live. We should be living to eat, and it should be a process. And as we prepare food, our body is picking up on the messages from smell, and that starts to create enzymes in our mouth that prepares our digestive tract that allows us to absorb those nutrients. And so there's this whole process that allows us to actually use the food as fuel rather than like driving through the drive-through or throwing something in the microwave. You don't even experience that really important step of digestion, right?
Yeah.
And the food is no longer medicine. The food is just like kibble. That's a really good way to say it.
Yeah. And there's, like, not to get woo-woo, because I don't even know how to define this, but food that has been prepared with human hands has a different energy to it than food that's been microwaved in a plastic bag. It just does. And I don't know how to explain it. And I don't know the science, but I will fight for that idea to the death, because I'm like, it just feels different. And then when you sit down and eat it with people, other humans face to face, like it's nourishing in way more ways than just the vitamins and minerals that are in that food.
Yeah, that is so true. And so I would say I have my own idea in my head, but I'd love to hear your idea first. If somebody was going to start, and let's assume, so we're talking about so far, like stripping away the ingredients, the foods that have just tons of ingredients, and focusing on getting whole foods. Now we're going to step into this idea of what of these whole foods can we actually prepare on our own and not buy at the store? What would you say would be a good place for somebody to start with making? What foods should they start making?
That's a good question. And it's tricky because we all have different diets, especially these days. You know, some of us are gluten-free, some of us are more vegetarian, some of us are carnivore. There's like all these extremes. So I would say pick a food that you really enjoy. So if you're a meat eater, figure out how to cut up a whole chicken, which a lot of Americans don't know how to do that. And it's more cost effective and it's more sustainable because we're using all of the bird. And then you can prepare that meats with marinades or seasonings. If you're a salad lover, ditch the store-bought salad dressings, which contain a ton of seed oils and MSG and things, and figure out how to make your own vinaigrettes. There's a million different ways to do vinaigrettes. They're so good. And that's really a quick win for you because it's easy. If you eat bread, try ditching the white store-bought bread. And I think bread is something that needs to go in baby steps because it can be pretty intimidating. But start with just making your own biscuits instead of buying the can of biscuits that pop, or making your own pie crust instead of buying frozen pie crust. And then if you really want to be adventurous, like a lot of people were during COVID, you can get into the sourdoughs. You can get, I think, kind of to me, the ultimate in bread, if you're going to eat bread, are heritage or ancient grains that are cooked or baked in a traditional way using fermentation or souring, because that breaks down those phytochemicals in there. It makes them more digestible, makes it easier on our bodies. So there's those graduated steps, but
that's
I think
so doable. I love how you said that.
yes.
I was kind of thinking like jumping right into sourdough or making pickles, but that can be kind of intimidating. Also, you don't want people to feel like you're setting them up for failure, right? If this is a brand new thing. So the fact that you can look at, if you're a more omnivore, carnivore, you really enjoy meat, just learning how to cut up a chicken. You're so right. That is a very simple yet overwhelming idea for somebody that's never done it before.
Yes.
It's hard to fail at that. You can still eat the chicken even if you cut it wrong.
Totally. Yeah. And you will fail. And that's why I tell people, they're like, what if I fail? I'm like, you will. That's a good thing. It means you're trying. So I failed a loaf of sourdough bread the other day. I just bombed it bad. It was fine. Like moving on, trying new techniques. So it's failure is just means you're on the right path.
And it doesn't, you're right. It doesn't stop. I've been making sourdough for 5 years now. And I still, every once in a while, I'm like, what in the world? How did I screw that up?
I know the kids were
continue.
Like, mom.
Yeah. Such a bummer.
Yeah.
Okay. So I love this. These are really helpful steps. So start by figuring out what are you consuming a lot of, or what do you enjoy consuming, and look at that. So if it is salad dressing is great. And by the way, you need to go to Jill's blog because she has a lot of recipes and information and just all kinds of helpful tips about what we're speaking of now. And then the other idea is, so if we're looking at what foods can you make, what would be another step if somebody said, okay, I kind of feel like I've got a handful of things that I'm making. This is something that I've wrapped my mind around. I'm slowly working on. If somebody wanted to start growing something at their home, but again, not a lot of space, what guidance would you give them, or what would you say to start with?
Yeah, so we can go in spaces as small as, let's say you have no outdoor space in an apartment, you could grow sprouts on your countertops, and there's tons of tutorials, and those are really rich in vitamin C and all sorts of nutrients. And they're so good on salads and wraps. If you have a little more room, a patio or a balcony, container gardening, there's so many resources. So the key is, if you're going to grow in a container, you need really good soil that is nutrient rich. You could do tomatoes, squash, herbs, cucumbers, so many things. And then if you have a backyard, I would dig up a corner of it, or I would dig up the front. I mean, it depends on your HOA and depends on your neighbors, but I'm like, why do we as Americans think lawns are so beautiful? I think that food is way more beautiful, and a well-kept garden is romantic. So don't be afraid to be the weirdo, because it's actually not being the weirdo. It's actually being more normal than the alternative, but you can do a lot with a little space.
I love that. You're right. And when you think about, here's something too, that I've done a lot of different testing on clients, especially with cancer, of course, and we learn about all the toxins that are in our blood. And one of the things that people don't realize with lawns, they're planting this beautiful sod, and it's often full of toxic chemicals.
Oh, so toxic. Yeah.
What a better way to just resurface your whole area with wildflowers and allowing yourself to grow food. Simple, like just having some simple herbs, or I don't know. I love that idea, because it is important to understand the toxins that come in lawn.
Yes, a ton. And it's funny when people are always like, well, I don't have time to garden. I'm like, how many hours are you mowing and fertilizing and watering? And I think that American urge to like tend the lawn is actually the urge to be connected to the soil and to grow things. We're just kind of misdirecting it a little bit. So I'm like, maybe you should ditch the lawn, and maybe we should direct that energy over to growing edible things instead.
I love that. That's actually a really good point. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. And you see it. I mean, every Saturday when we used to live in a neighborhood, everybody's out there mowing their lawn, working on weeding, and how
Yeah.
much more rich and satisfying would that be if you were pulling from there to feed your family?
Yes.
I think that's awesome.
That brings up a good point, because I think all of these skills, I think some people are scared to embark, whether it's the cooking or the gardening or whatever, just because it feels like a lot of work. And we all have busy lives. We're modern people with things to do. But I think one of the most underrated benefits of this lifestyle, this homestead or old-fashioned lifestyle, is that it feels good once you do it, because you're getting that hint of satisfaction. You're moving your body, you're getting fresh air, you're working with your hands, and our brains are wired to reward those actions. And so what people realize is they start gardening to grow the carrots and the tomatoes, but they kind of get hooked on it because they just feel good. We're creating, we're nurturing, we're tending, we're meant to do those things. And it just, yeah, it's that overall holistic health picture coming into play.
It 100% is. And I can say that for a fact. When we moved, so we moved here the end of October, and I never understood how just impactful it is to get first thing in the morning, because you have farm chores, right? You have to go out first thing in the morning, feed the animals, and just that simple act of getting outside first thing in the morning and taking care of something else that is either going to nourish you back. I mean, it is such a therapeutic practice.
Yes.
And I haven't even, I mean, I've started my garden in the sense of like trying to rework the soil, and that is humbling. But I love it. I love getting my hands dirty. It's such rewarding work. So you're right. I love that point of, this is actually how we were created. We weren't created to live in boxes and go to work in boxes and not experience what God gave us to not only use to nourish our families, but to help sustain the land as well.
Yeah. And it's still, with the rises in anxiety and depression and all these issues these days, everyone's like, I don't know why they're on the rise. And I'm like, how could they not be on the rise? This is not how we're meant to live. It's so unnatural. Like it's our bodies are screaming at us, like, do something different. This is not the way it's supposed to be. So
yeah, that's so true. I guess the last question I would ask is, if somebody is, okay, so we've talked about some simple steps that they can do to begin taking more control over their food and over their understanding of home and nourishment for their family without being so reliant on, well, the industry that we've become reliant upon. If they're wanting to go, okay, so now I'd like to find a farmer to get my meat from, what direction do you give people that are saying like, okay, I want to find somebody that I can order meat from you? And I want you to share about your opportunity as well. Or maybe they want to get raw milk. And I know that's different in every state, but is there a direction that you give people that are wanting to do that?
Yeah, I think word of mouth is the best way to find those resources right now. There's some websites. I think one is like Local Harvest or Eat Local, and you can kind of Google around and use the internet to your advantage. Sometimes communities have kind of holistic minded Facebook groups or co-ops. But the best way I found is I'll just put it out there on Facebook, or I'll ask my crunchy friends and go, where are you getting the meat? Where are you getting the milk? Who has the best farmers market stuff? And just kind of go around it that way. And then there are, of course, people, if you cannot find sources locally, there's more and more stuff online. We've shipped beef nationwide. There's people who are shipping all kinds of stuff nationwide. And so you can tap into those resources, which, as much as I rail on the industrial age, I'm like, there's some really good pieces to technology and to living in the world we do, because we have those connections we couldn't have before.
Oh, 100%. And like you said in the beginning of this, just the information that we have access to now is such a blessing, as long as you don't let it overwhelm you and you find the right people to follow that are giving you helpful advice, not making you feel like you are going to fail, like you said, but not making you feel like you have to keep up with something else. So tell us, if somebody wanted to order your beef, how could they do that?
So they could head over to genuinebeefco.com. And then we can ship to all the states except Alaska and Hawaii, just because the shipping gets really expensive. But we are grass-fed, grass-finished, no hormones, no steroids. They live out like just down the road here their whole life. We haul them personally to be processed. It's as local and as family as you can get. And people have been saying it tastes really good. So we definitely enjoy it. Would love to have people try it out.
Oh, that is so awesome. I will link that in the show notes for you guys as well. And tell us before we go about, you have a homestead planner that I tried to order and it was sold out.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
didn't quite I didn't download it. I should do that and just have it printed somewhere. But I want you to tell us about your book, the planner, because you have a book coming out, or it came out.
I do. Yes. I have a book coming out when is it? This September 2023. So,
And what is that book going to be about?
really kind of what we talked about today. It's called Old Fashioned on Purpose, and it's giving people that blueprint for less industrial and more intentional. And we have 9 principles of an old fashioned on purpose life. And it's for people who maybe can't move to a farm, and really just helping them strip back the layers where they are at right now.
Oh, perfect. I love
Yes,
that.
you didn't even know. And we segued. It was a beautiful episode. Yeah.
Yeah, that was so perfect. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And then the planner, you can still download. It's Old Fashioned on Purpose Planner, correct?
Yes, you can get the digital version, and we'll have the 2024 version available usually in the fall, if people want to use that. And it's your typical planner, like with a spiral binding, but it's designed for people who are growing their own food and cooking more. And so we have all those trackers and inventories and stuff in there.
Okay, awesome. I love that. This has been so awesome, Jill. Thank you for sharing just your wisdom. And I have just loved learning from you. It has been so helpful. And I will make sure to link all of Jill's sites, her podcast, her Instagram is really helpful, her website for you to also follow along. And let me ask you, I like to ask all of my guests, is there something in particular that has been inspiring you lately? Something, maybe it's a show, a song, a book, whatever it is.
Yes, I do have a book here. I know it'll be probably backwards. I guess, I don't know if we're doing video or not, but I'll read it to the title to people. It's called What Your Food Ate: How to Heal Our Land and Reclaim Our Health by David Montgomery and Anne Bickley. And man, I think you would love this season. And I know your audience probably would too, because it's stuff that I kind of already knew. I knew that our food is losing its nutrients as we go along in our modern era. And I knew that glyphosate wasn't good for the soil. And I knew that our soil was being lost with tilling, but like, man, these guys break it down and explain it in a way that just blew my mind. And it is making me rethink how I garden. I was doing pretty good, but I'm like, I could do better. It's making me rethink how I'm making bread and my flours. And so it's rocked my world. I love this book. So What's Your Food Ate?
I just wrote that down and I'm 100% adding to cart. I need that.
Yes.
That sounds amazing.
Yes. I love books. I have just all the
Me
books.
too. And you know what I found too? Here's the other thing, by the way, you guys, bonus is I don't advise doing this when you're outside all the time, because part of being outside is just experiencing nature in its fullness. But one of the things I found is when I'm gardening or when I'm doing chores, when I'm feeding the horses or mucking stalls, I can listen to a podcast or a book that is filling my soul or feeding me information that is going to help me continue to live this life that we were meant to live, not in a box, but just being really engaged with the land and with our food. And so I love that you made a suggestion of a book. So get outside, maybe listen to it on Audible if you don't want to read it. But that's helpful. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing with our audience. And it was such a gift. I appreciate you taking the time.
It was wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And we can't wait for your book to come out, and we'll make sure to link to all of that in the show notes.
Awesome.